Hi, this is Matt Burns from the University of Missouri, here again to talk about research. And I have an esteemed colleague with me here today, Dr. Nell Duke, who is at the University of Michigan in the College of Education there. She has received too many awards and notoriety to be able to list all of them. So I'll say that she's received her doctorate in her EDD from Harvard College of Education and has been a prolific researcher ever since. Dr. Duke, Nell, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I'm going to highlight an article today that she co-authored, and I'm going to share the screen so everyone can see it. So this is, I'll let you explain everything. I won't try and explain. I just want to put it for everyone to see. It's in press in American Educational Research Journal. It's looking at a project-based learning approach with second graders in social studies and literacy learning. So this intrigued me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've already said this to you. This is really good research. I really get excited about strong studies. And this is a very strong study. So I'm just anxious and excited to share it. But also, when we think of science of reading, I think we oftentimes have a narrow view of science of reading. And this one kind of expands that just a little bit, I think, and also applies it to content areas, which is maybe not the right term to use anymore, but social studies, science. And I think those areas should be just full of science of reading. So I'm going to stop sharing now. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. And ask you, Dr. Duke, so please, first of all, start by describing the intervention that you did. What did you guys do?
Sure. So we took the social studies period of time in second grade and we replaced whatever teachers would normally be doing during social studies in our experimental group with the social studies curriculum that we had written. And this curriculum uses a project-based approach to social studies. We had 4 project-based units over the course of the school year. One unit focused on civics and government, one focused on economics, one focused on history, and one focused on geography. So with each of these project-based units, teachers had 20 sessions to teach of about 45 minutes each. So, it was 80 sessions. The curriculum was written to be 80 sessions over the course of a school year with a little bit of review at the end. Just to give you an example of what a project would be, for example, for our civics and government unit, children visited a local park or other public space in their community and studied it and identified strengths, but also weaknesses or areas for improvement in the park. And then their project was to learn about their local city government, identify someone in the local city government who has some responsibility or authority over parks, and then to write a persuasive text to that person to try to get them to improve the park. And actually we had both a group component for that project, which was a PowerPoint or presentation that would be delivered live to this individual, and then an individual written part. Every child wrote a letter using a persuasive text approach that person could then distribute to other members of the government. So everything that kids were doing over the course of that unit was toward that project aim of improving the park or other public space. But in the process, we were addressing specific standards that we had, set the curriculum up to address. For example, they're learning about local government, which is often a second grade social studies topic, and certainly was in Michigan where we did the study. And they were learning informational reading and writing skills as well, because that was another one of our goals. So they were, for example, learning about the features of informational text that are part of the second grade Common Core State Standards for literacy. But in children's minds, they're learning about those features to help move them along in their project goals to improve or to catalyze the improvement of a park or other public space. So that was the intervention.
Okay. So from a reading perspective, the focus was informational text and then writing, of course. Awesome.
That's exactly right. So it was during social studies time, but we weren't just trying to improve social studies. Our goal was also to improve informational reading and writing. And we also hope to have an impact on just kids' motivation to learn around both reading and writing and social studies.
Cool. Okay, so what did you find?
So just quickly about the design, this was a randomized controlled trial. So we had 48 classrooms across 20 elementary schools in 11 school districts, and we randomly assigned the classrooms to either be in the experimental group, that was 24 classrooms, or to be in the control group, that was another 24 classrooms. We did ask the teachers in the control group to make sure to teach social studies. As maybe some of your viewers know, unfortunately, science and social studies instruction are quite rare in early elementary classrooms in the US, particularly in high poverty school districts. And this is problematic for many reasons, because we know that building content knowledge is important to literacy development, and building content knowledge is also important, of course, in science and social studies. So we did need to ask the control group teachers to make a bit of a change to at least try to teach social studies on a regular basis so that we would, have a comparison there. So what we found was that the experimental group children made much more progress in social studies. They knew more about social studies and knew more skills that are used in social studies as well. And they also improved at a statistically significant level in their informational reading. They didn't improve in informational writing or motivation, and that was a bit of a surprise to us because there was, writing in each of the projects, not every day, but, a fair amount of writing. So we dug into the data a little further, and what we found was that the teachers who implemented our units in a manner more consistent with how we'd written them they actually did have statistically significantly greater growth in motivation and in informational writing. So it looked like those two areas were vulnerable to how teachers implemented the instruction more so than the social studies and informational reading were. In terms of effect sizes, the social studies effect size was 0.482. That's pretty substantial. What Works Clearinghouse says that 0.25 or higher, as I'm sure is a substantively important effect. The informational reading effect was a little under 0.25. It was 0.182. And at first, your viewers might think, well, that's not much of a bump. But what we would argue is that because we'd also hope to be seeing informational reading and writing work happening in science, and we'd also hope to see some informational reading and writing work happening in the literacy or language arts block. If you would put those kinds of effect sizes together, you could get something, more substantial. And of course, this is just 1 year as well. So that's what we found.
Right. Well, also, I have to give you credit too for people aren't familiar with this. It happens a lot in research, in my opinion. People will randomize by classroom and then analyze by student, which I think is kind of cheating. So you get like 10 classrooms, but you get 300 kids, and so the power becomes 300 instead of 10, and it should be 10. And you held it to that 48, obviously, which was great, and still saw significant effects even with ends of 24 in each group. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, no, thanks for pointing that out. I totally agree with you. There's a lot of sloppy unit of analysis happening in the research, and you're right. We used a hierarchical linear modeling approach so that we were taking into account the fact that children are nested within classrooms and just the 48 classrooms.
Yep, great. And then, so have other studies looked at this approach, or is this consistent with other research, or was this completely surprising?
Yeah, no, this is consistent with other approach on project-based learning. Nearly all the studies on project-based learning and that we've reviewed do tend to find positive impacts, but a lot of them are methodologically not quite what we'd want. So I think a difference here is that, we did do a true randomized control trial. And I will also say that our study is a bit different in that most of the research on project-based learning has been done with older students. So second grade was relatively young to be studying project-based learning. And another important difference I should point out is that we did our study in high poverty, low performing school districts. And so, a fair amount of the research that's been done in project-based learning has been done in other kinds of settings. So that added to the literature as well.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So this is science, and so science, we always know have flaws, and we have to be the ones to point out our own flaws. What was one limitation that you'd like to point out for this particular study?
Yeah, for sure. Every study has limitations, and this one certainly did as well. I think one really important limitation of our study is that we tested the impact of project-based learning in teachers' first year of implementing this approach. And if if you've ever tried project-based learning, any of your viewers, I think they'll be able to tell you that there is a learning curve, right, in doing really high-quality project-based learning work. And in fact, there's research by Marks and colleagues going back a ways, 2004, where they studied over 3 years the effects of project-based learning. And they did find that project-based learning had greater effects after, in the third year than it had in the first year, as you might expect. So I feel like our study is limited in that I think we may have underestimated the impact of project-based learning over time because we were only looking at teachers' first go around with it. So I think that's an important limitation. And I also like to make sure to underscore to people that our study doesn't show that all project-based learning works. I've seen some very bad project-based learning that I'm entirely sure is not going to prove to be effective in research. What our study shows is that this particular way of doing project-based learning, that we did it, which was very standards aligned, embedded evidence-based practices, was very structured, had lots of support for teachers with every lesson written out and so on, that kind of project-based learning at least seems to be effective.
Fantastic, thank you. Let me take a second here and show everyone your website because it's a great resource. There we go. And this is just nellkduke.org, correct?
That's right, nellkduke.org.
Great. And if you look here under resources, there's information stuff about informational text, comprehension, literacy. So if I click on one, do we see articles and things like that?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a mix. So on this page with phonics, you'll see a couple of videos I've shot about doing phonics and other kinds of instruction in an online or remote context. You'll see an article that Heidi Mesmer and I wrote called Phonics Faux Pas, which is about common missteps that people make when they're implementing phonics instruction. You'll see some books here that are relevant. The What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide on Foundational Skills Instruction is there, which we just think is a great resource as well. So, under each of these categories, you'll find a number of items. And that includes, under project-based learning, the units, the second grade units that we wrote, and several of the materials that are needed to implement those are right in there under project-based units. There's a video, a 6-minute video there that kind of takes you inside one classroom's work, not a classroom participating in the study, but another classroom, their work implementing these project-based units and so on. So hopefully there'll be some useful pieces there as well.
Right, and I want to highlight your research methodology one in this article here, 10 things every literacy educator should know about research. That's a great resource. So lots of great information there.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Again, thank you so much. This is fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks. Bye.